again on the video. In this track, we talked about regenerative spaces, and we're joined by Matthew Lee, who is the Director of Empirical Research at Harvard's Human Flourishing Program. We talked about questions like, what are regenerative spaces, and how do we foster them, but most importantly, how do we protect them? And this conversation was one of the best tracks we've had so far. It put a name to a concept that a lot of us understood but couldn't exactly identify. And so I know that you're going to learn a lot. And without further ado, here is the Trek. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Trek. The Trek is a Civics Unplugged series where community members participate in meaningful discussions on topics that are too often neglected when thinking about building the future. Through prompting questions and provocations, we venture together into complex but important conversations related to building the future and democracy. We understand that this work requires ongoing dialogue, but it's a journey worth trekking through. I'm Madison, and a high school senior from Verdigris, Oklahoma, joined by some of our community members and a special guest, which we'll get to hear from in just a moment. And today we're talking about regenerative spaces. And we start off with a word association. So when you see your name on the screen, give a brief introduction and the 1 to 3 words you associate with the topic and why. And Ashley, you can go ahead and get it started off.
Awesome. Hey everyone, my name is Ashley Lynn. I'm 17 from Vancouver, Washington. When I think about regenerative spaces, I think about growth and not linear. So I don't think kind of that process happens in a straight path. I think the whole point of like making sure there are regenerative processes is to help people overcome like different obstacles and different challenges. So it definitely isn't just like a straight line.
I'm happy to go next. Hi, my name is Chapka Pumba. I am 19 and a builder of this community. And when I think of regenerative spaces, I think of the words experience and replicate. So I've had regenerative experiences, and those were just like really specific situations with the right people and the right environment and the right topic. But it's also really difficult to like replicate that same experience continuously. And to have a space that continuously kind of has that same experience of regenerative spaces. So those are the 2 words that come to mind.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Phoebe Amanira. I am 17 years old from Dallas, Texas, and a 21 fellow. When I think of regenerative spaces, I think of something dying and something coming back. Maybe that's a little too literal, but that's what comes to mind first.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Mariam Turk. I'm 17 and a builder from the suburbs of Chicago. And when I think of regenerative spaces, I think of different for everyone because things that like are able to stimulate people and help people out is very like tailored to each person's like different like personalities or maybe like their different ways to get their energy, whether they're like introverts or extroverts, things like that. So I think that like a big part of regenerative spaces is that it has to cater to like a wide variety of people, or that they just have to be a lot of different types of regenerative spaces that are able to kind of stimulate the different types of people that are out there.
All right. Hello, I'm Crystal. I'm a senior from Texas. And when I think of regenerative spaces, I think of growth with action.
Hey, Ashton.
Yes. Hi, my name is Ashton. I am 16 from Alza County, Kentucky. And when I think of regenerative spaces, I think of tranquility because I've been reading into Stoicism lately. And one of the main ideas is that tranquility is distinct from the environment and such.
Great. Thank you all. And my name's Matthew. I'm the director of empirical research at Harvard's Human Flourishing Program. And when I think of regenerative spaces, I think primarily that they're caring or loving, depending on whichever word resonates. And there's an openness about them. So there's fewer constraints. Everyone is welcome. So caring and open.
Hey everyone, I'm Gary, calling in from New York City. I think my words are hard to develop. Because I think in order for you to create a regenerative space, it's hard to do it unless you've been a part of it. And what I would imagine is that there's not enough regenerative spaces out in the world, as there should be.
Yeah, and I would just say healing, because in a time when there are so many spaces that drain us of our energy and really impede on our flourishing, regenerative spaces are the places that keep us sane and heal us all the time. So yeah, thank you all for sharing those word associations. Now we can go ahead and hop into the conversation. And I do have a question to get us started off with. I don't know if it's necessary anymore because I don't know, maybe we can just talk about pretty broadly. What are regenerative spaces? Maybe you can talk about specifically what they are to you as well.
I don't mind starting. When I think of regenerative spaces based on what everyone said, I think of a place where, like how Gary said, it's hard to develop because it's a place where someone's mindset dies or someone's old habits, and then they're able to come back with newer and better ones to contribute to society as a whole. Like caring, loving, openness, like those are things that have to be practiced, and for you to be stronger and be better at them, like those soft skills and that emotional intelligence is built.
Yeah, I would add to that there's a sense of, I agree with Gary that they're hard to develop sometimes because so many of our spaces seem to be extractive in some way, that we're either being diminished as human beings or we're taking something from the environment or from other groups to benefit ourselves. So to intentionally create a space where we are growing, not at the expense of others or the environment, it's not necessarily an easy fit because so many of our processes are extractive. So in a classroom, for example, if we are being graded individually, there is almost a sense of competition, especially if the teacher's using some kind of a bell curve, that we have to outshine our classmates as opposed to collaborating with them to developing, deeper wisdom and mastery for all of us. So I think that, this distinction between extractive and diminishment versus, a kind of mutually beneficial growth is really important.
This question really reminds me of another trek that we had. And I think regenerative spaces are also ones that are almost like infinite. Their purpose and contribution to both you and like the participants that are there, like it's ongoing rather than ones that are finite, that have like a very definitive end that serve a very singular purpose. And I think that really contributes to what you were saying, Matthew, about the fact of just like, if it doesn't quite necessarily like have an end, you don't feel as if you have to like give up things, and you can kind of grow. And so examples that come to mind are like group chats that I have with my friends. Those are conversations that never end, and they're kind of just about everything, and they are almost like sacred in their own way, in the sense that it's like a way to replenish energy and to talk to your friends and also like source out wisdom or even just good energy throughout the day. So that's kind of what came to mind.
To build off what Chabu said, when she mentioned group chats, like I immediately thought of communication. And then that's like how things are communicated, like how does the regeneration come to place? Like, is that in a way, making sure that's in a way that people understand that they're not feeling attacked? and making sure that like there's all love, there's all grace when it comes to growing, because that's what I associate it with.
I think that something else that it reminded me of when a lot, especially when you're talking about like infinite, like an infinite aspect of regenerative spaces, was that it can't really be dependent on like one person giving knowledge or wisdom, because like a person can't really be like the full, like the sole aspect of a regenerative space, because like if that person leaves and that space is gone, or like that person can't give infinitely because they too need to be like replenished around them. And so like I feel like a regenerative space isn't built around like a person giving something, or like the traditional model of like extraction that a lot of other things are like built off of, like Matthew, like you were talking about earlier, and like Chabu, you were mentioning too, because I feel like that like model just isn't conducive to like helping people grow or flourish or like heal themselves in like today's world. And I think that's why it's necessary to have regenerative spaces. But that kind of leads me into another provocation, and we don't have to go because not everyone has talked about what their definition of regenerative spaces, but maybe just to write it down, like what characterizes a regenerative space, or like what are aspects of a regenerative space that are kind of like indicative that it is like a space that people can go to like heal. And I'm curious to see what people attribute them to, because it, like I said, like I'm not really sure that it's reliant on specific people. So I'm wondering, just curious about what they might be composed of.
Regenerative spaces remind me of what Marcus Aurelius said, that the greatest retreat is within oneself. And I think in some ways the greatest regenerative space is one's own thoughts and their reservations and ideas and such, and how they approach things.
I think that, I don't know, I like the whole idea of it's like they're places that are not extractive. Like you're not going there to necessarily get anything out of them besides like I feel like they're also really like conducive to like the flow state. Like anytime you're in a regenerative space, like Chabu brought up group chats, like that's just like a great example. You're just like so in like so whatever like the person is saying it, for some people it's like working out. The gym might be like a regenerative space for you or whatever, and you're just like getting the flow. And I think that like I just come back to healing. A place that like grounds you, a space that's kind of like your anchor as well, and like a place that it's hard to imagine your like well-being or flourishing without.
I really like that point about healing medicine. I guess I also think about kind of just this idea of like heart space is something I talk about a lot with my friends. Just essentially a space where, you know, you are able to slow down, to be listened to lovingly, and to be treated with kindness and respect, right? I think so much of what makes a space regenerative is just being able to like love more, and just like expand your sense of like what matters and what counts, to be able to like exercise empathy and just see abundance, right? Because like I think generative is such an important word. It's like you are creating more together, like you aren't draining each other, like the group collectively has more agency over the world.
What I like, well, there's lots of things I like about this. Actually, I'm learning a lot, and what I like is that you're all noticing regenerative space is possible at many different levels within one's own mind, within a group chat with friends, or in the broader world. If we're creating something that's healing, that has more heart space, I really like that allows people to connect in ways that are sacred or healing, or some language like that, and connect with the broader world as well. It's not just about people. How do we connect with the sacredness of the land, or the living creatures on the land? all of this suggests that there's the possibility of co-creating regenerative space at many levels. And maybe it's always a potential there that we could seek out, looking for abundance rather than living from the assumption of scarcity.
Yeah, this is something that I was thinking about when you were mentioning the education system. Like, I think a lot of systems are like just basically do not allow for regenerative spaces to exist because of the original objectives of them, like you mentioned with the education system, and that's just true for so many others. And so I know that when I think of regenerative spaces, they aren't necessarily like systemic because I don't know. A question that I want to pose is is it possible to systemically create regenerative spaces? If so, how would you go about doing that?
I mean, I think what immediately comes to mind is so much of what is regenerative is about process and culture. And I think it's definitely possible to create that type of culture that facilitates regeneration. I think it just requires a lot of intention in how you approach it.
And also, if that system prioritizes like heart spaces, if it prioritizes empathy, if it prioritizes things like kindness, I think it would make it easier. I think it would make, if it goes in with that intention, I think it would make it easier to build regenerative spaces within that.
I think that it's possible, and my answer is dictated and biased by the fact that we really need to live in a world where it's possible. But I will say that they also happen accidentally and unintentionally, and they're usually created by imperfect people. And so for them to be systemically created, I don't think it requires you know, people who emulate every plausible characteristic that someone would think would be perfect for that space. So I think that you can create regenerative spaces out of anything. I just don't know if it can happen systemically, because a lot of it has to do with the aspects of regenerative spaces. There are things that are intangible. There are things that are hard to kind of hold in your hand or refer to as a data point. And it has a lot to do with internal intentionality. And so I do think it's possible. I'm just not sure if it's systemic. But it can exist in virtually any space just because the requirements aren't that you're a perfect person. It's just that you're someone who's willing and has good intentions.
We could think about the criminal justice system as a system for a moment and think about, the kind of conventional process of excluding offenders, either in prison or some other way, marking someone with a criminal record so it's more difficult to get a job or vote in some places. We could imagine, and for most of human history this was the case, a more restorative process where there's the possibility of making amends, of making things right, of learning, and for the individual to learn and for the community to learn. There's an assumption that something went wrong within the community, that the community has a special responsibility. And if we start with that assumption, then I think there is the possibility of collective intention as well. And we begin to imagine the root causes of an individual's externalizing behavior, extractive behavior. And we start to notice, what is it about the community that's encouraging that? And how do we begin to then learn collectively and have this collective intention to offer something that's more restorative or more regenerative? So I've done a little work in the field of restorative justice, and I see some potential, but it's embedded within a system that's fundamentally about exclusion and oftentimes not about learning. It's not about growth.
That just made me think about how Buddhist meditative practices are often integrated into big companies to pump out more work for the company. So like, you have someone that's 10% functioning at higher capacity. Oh, it's a regenerative practice that you're implementing across your company. Oh, let's partner with Headspace. Okay. But it's just like feeding this like, capital obsessed machine, extractive machine. And that's how I feel, honestly, oftentimes with Civics Unplugged. I just feel crazy a lot of times, really. Just like, thinking that we can go up against these kind of centuries long built tides of extraction. But I don't know.
There's important information in your own emotional experience about this. I think that you're right, that we face a monumental task, but we're naming what the problem is, and other people are using different language perhaps, but naming similar kinds of problems. So the possibility of convergent thinking throughout the world, I think, is quite strong right now, because we're learning from our own experience what we don't trust. What's going to, if we're stuck in an extractive system, then we can cope, but we have a hard time transforming it. But coping is insufficient. So I know, speaking of sort of mindfulness practices, the way that they're implemented in the Buddhist tradition, it's the Eightfold Path, and ethics are part of that. In the kind of secular spaces where mindfulness is practiced, it's a One-Fold Path, and it's disconnected from ethics. So we can notice right away that we've extracted something from a very rich and robust tradition that has existed for thousands of years. And we've tried to, turn it into a commodity of sorts, and then deploy it for more extraction. So within that process, we can see exactly what the problem is. We've taken something that was regenerative and we've turned it into something extractive. And it should cause us to feel unease when that is occurring. But now we know what's problematic about that. Who could be against mindfulness? Why would that be problematic? Well, what system is it serving? And is that system ultimately regenerative? And if we're just allowing extraction to proceed with greater efficiency, then we've got a principle that we can say no. I'm going to work with others to collectively create a space that actually is regenerative, and embed that in a larger space that's regenerative. And I'm looking for others who want to join that movement.
I think, go ahead, Javier.
Oh, sorry. This made me think of the fact that like there are so many places that either claim or aspire to be regenerative. Sometimes it's like with bad intention and they're kind of just doing it for the sake of like amplifying extraction. And sometimes it's done with like purely holistic intentions, and then it evolves into being something, completely dangerous and extractive in its own right. And so I think my like new provocation or question is, how do you protect or continue to ensure that something is regenerative and doesn't evolve or slowly lose sight of that like initial vision?
I think I might have a thought about that. Because Mr. Matthew, when you said collective intention, it's funny that Gary said, started talking about Buddhism, because I've recently started reading works by the Dalai Lama, because it's like so interesting. But it made me think of what the Dalai Lama said about collective responsibility that is taught through secular ethics. To protect regenerative spaces, it's important that everyone has a sense of collective responsibility that sees the world as not just themselves and then the ones they love, but them themselves, the one they love, and like an extension them and an extension of them and an extension of them, like until it reaches to everyone and just caring more. And Ashley spoke about empathy, and that plays such a huge role in it. But I'm sure everyone's heard of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and seeing self-actualization as the extension of yourself. And until, in a perfect world, until everyone has reached that stage, I don't think you could forever protect a regenerative space from becoming extractive.
Yeah, and I also think that like anytime you participate in a regenerative space for the purpose of extraction, like at any point in time, then it's bound to like basically just like ruin, I guess is the only way I can say that, to be ruined for you. I know like a lot of people, they're like, if they're like burned out from school or whatever, they're like, I'll do this one thing that I enjoy for like an hour or two so that I can finally get back on the grind in the next hour. But that's not how regenerative spaces work. It's not like I'm just gonna like do it for an hour and then I'll be good. Like there's something that they don't like necessarily have like a timestamp on, and like for you to truly like be healed, it can't be like contingent on you like getting ready to like get back to work or like get back to like being in like extractive spaces. And so I just feel like so many people have been kind of like forced into like ruining those sacred spaces of theirs because of that.
I also think that what Phoebe was talking about in terms of like collective responsibility is like something that's super important in protecting regenerative spaces, because I feel like in a lot of spaces right now it's like, oh, like shove off the blame off of this person or that person, like as long as it's not on yourself, and like it protects you, but then like overall the entire space is pretty vulnerable because like someone's still at fault either way, and people are less worried about fixing the problem in the first place rather than just like shunting off the blame to somebody else. And I think with the idea of collective responsibility, it helps a lot because it doesn't really matter like who is to blame. It's just the matters that like there's a problem that exists and we need to work together to like solve it and like move forward and grow. And I think it kind of helps foster like growth mindset rather than just like a stuck in like all this like negativity of like, oh, this person did this or said this or did this, and like that's why we're in this problem to begin with. So I think that like overall everyone having this need to like contribute to like growing or just like furthering the mission of like the regenerative space is super important, and collective responsibility definitely helps to protect it. So I love that point a lot.
So this question was like really, really inspired by people who run for office. And like this is a reoccurring conversation that we have at CU, just like how everyone, there are a lot of people that go at it with like genuine intentions of like wanting to do good and impact the system in ways that are meaningful. But like the process of getting there, or like once you're there, just like the system at large, um, you almost start to contribute to those challenges. And so I think that for me, I always like operate under the assumption that like I am not immune to being compromised by like the systems that I'm participating in. And it's not a solution, but I think just like not assuming that immunity ever at any point in time. And like, yes, you can, and being really intentional about that, because even like our government has things like checks and balances to kind of serve the purpose of protecting that entire space, but you can't even trust your checks and balances. Like those are also not immune to being compromised. And so I think that level of awareness creates accountability that's never supposed to end, and also never places like the blame or the responsibility of it, of being continuously cognizant of that onto anyone else.
All right, anyone have anything else to add or want to pose another question or provocation?
I know we've been talking about them, and I think I have a general understanding of what regenerative space is, but I would love to know what regenerative spaces mean. Like if there's an actual definition, or does that kind of defeat the purpose of the trek? I'm sorry.
Well, I can give some examples. We talked about, you know, a justice system that would be more regenerative, where there would be community learning and, you know, growth and, you know, if there's a victim that has suffered, there would be the fullness of that suffering would be seen, and the gravity of that would be appreciated, and there would be some path to make things as right as possible. You can't undo the past, but you can make things as right as possible. Another place where the word regenerative is getting used more frequently is around agriculture, as we have had this very bad collective habit, not just in one country, but all over the world, of turning the living soil into lifeless dirt. And through some fairly simple practices, planting different kinds of crops and just, rotating crops and no-till and all this kind of thing, you can regenerate the soil, which is actually necessary for everyone's survival, because the plants are turning carbon dioxide into oxygen, which we need to breathe. So if you end up killing off all of the soil, you have a degenerative agricultural process. And if you attend to not just keeping things where they are, but actually improving or regenerating the soil, enhancing the soil, then you have a regenerative agricultural process. And so I think, we can look at workplaces the same way. A lot of workplaces, a lot of surveys, for example, Gallup survey company routinely finds that most people in most sectors of the economy are disengaged from their work. It's usually 7 out of 10, something like that. And yet there are workplaces that are can be described of as healing. There's a book on healing organizations. There are places where people feel like they're contributing to a deeper shared purpose that means something to them, and they're doing it in a way that's healthy and leaving a net positive result. So in the School of Public Health at Harvard, we work with the SHINE program, Sustainability and Health Initiative for Net Positive Enterprise. And so I think that in various sectors, people are making good progress on more regenerative forms of justice, more regenerative forms of agriculture, more regenerative workplaces, and even in education. I think there are extractive processes and there are very regenerative processes. I can think back to my second grade class. It was very unusual, but we used the creative arts to learn the core subjects. You didn't just go to art class and it was separate from, civics or English or something. You learned the subjects through being creative, and by having a puppet show. You would act out the play or something with sock puppets or something. So that was just such a joy. It was a regenerative space, and the teacher had a sense of humor and a sense of playfulness about education that was just absent in many other experiences in my life.
I really loved that last example about like the art class. It made me realize that all the examples that were on my mind were really just spaces where everything was allowed to be relevant as long as you felt strongly about it. So like that, by not imposing a boundary, there's almost like exponential growth that can happen. So like not limiting it to a subject or a topic. Earlier on, I talked about like my word of association had to do more so with experiences than spaces. And those were just experiences where I felt like my full being and all the things that I were interested got to be present in the conversation. I remember being on like a call with Madison and we were talking about democracy and building democracy. And I went on like a 10-minute like rant, to be quite honest, about why Beyonce is like the perfect civic superhero. And it was relevant to the conversation. And that was such a great experience because like the parts of my brain that love, political science and systems thinking got to be really present. And then the part of me that has like more information about Beyonce in my head than should possibly be healthy also got to be present in the conversation. And so I think that when boundaries are not imposed and people get to be their full selves, even in the ways that aren't necessarily like valued by society, it just creates something magical that can really, really, really be, I don't want to say capitalized on because that's extracting, but that can be really fulfilling.
Something that first of all, tell me that I loved your insight. I know we have different opinions on Beyonce, but she is an iconic queen and everything. Something that Madison said in the chat made me think of something. She said, places where you can bring your whole self. And so I was wondering, I don't mean to move on to like a different questions because we can totally stay on the one that we're on. But like, does different parts of yourself be regenerated in different spaces where like my mind is regenerated somewhere and my heart is like, no. And then my heart is regenerated, but my mind is like, I don't want to be here. So yeah.
Well, that's a great question.
I think in practice, that's how it is. We have an education system, and I'm an educator. I'm interested in the best within the education system, but oftentimes, in the words of a former Harvard chaplain, we treat students as though they're brains on a stick. And we're developing the intellectual capacities, but not so much the other parts. And I worked with a great nonprofit for a few years called Heart to Heart Communications. And we would go into business organizations, nonprofits, and others, and we would do leadership development, but only with the foundation that we're engaging the heart, primarily. And we're helping people to connect with their deepest core values and helping them to express those values in the workplace in ways that are healthy and actually better for the organization, having gone through this process. And that's what leadership is, being able to live from your heart and invite diverse others who may hold some shared values and express them somewhat differently, but understand diverse others and invite them to join you in this shared mission. So I think that, conventionally, we are dealing with only part of this is the knock against the medical system. You go in and your biology, but in fact, a person is more than their biology, and prescribing maintenance medications is not getting at the roots of problems. How do we treat the whole person? Integrative medicine is aiming at that. And historically, that was the dominant paradigm, and it's coming back.
Definitely. And I love like the point on like leadership too, because I feel like traditionally people feel like, oh, if I just implement this leadership tactic or like logically like it should make sense, but like a team like doesn't feel like a full team unless you like a leader is able to like open up their heart and be vulnerable. And like I know that sounds like super cheesy, but it's like such an important thing that where it's like you have to have that balance of like obviously like taking into consideration like logical like processes and like thinking intellectually, but like using like all full parts of yourself, like your heart and like your empathy, like things like that are like so important. And I think they're not like valued enough in like leadership spaces because it's not seen as like a quality that you can necessarily like put a number on or like anything that you could like measure necessarily. It's just like a feeling that you're able to provide for like the people on your team, which is like super important. But like to the overall question, I think that like it's really interesting for me, like something that's super like regenerative is like spending a day out in the city like with my friends or like doing things like that, and like afterwards I'm like physically exhausted after like walking all day and I can just like collapse in my bed, but like emotionally or like mentally I feel like so full and energized and like ready to do it all over again the next day. And so there definitely is that like disconnect between like, oh, this is like super regenerative for me like socially or like emotionally versus like physically like wiped out. So you definitely do have to do different things to like balance all parts of yourself, but I think that there are some things that can coexist as well, which is really cool.
All right, I think this is a good place to go ahead and hop into reflection. So I'm going to send a link to the notes in the chat so that you all can look over what we talked about and think about your reflection, and I can go ahead and get us started off. So Phoebe, I absolutely love this question that you posed. And it really got me thinking, like, absolutely yes, like all of your needs cannot be met by one space. And if they are, I would argue it's a bad thing, right? Because then you become dependent on the one space. Like you need to make sure that your needs are being met, and like you're taking part in all sorts of regenerative spaces, so that you're not too reliant on one like space. Basically, I think that is true flourishing.
I genuinely loved this conversation so much. It put a name to a concept that that exists, but I didn't quite have a name for it. And so just clarifying that makes it so much easier to kind of reflect on its relevance in my life and ways I'd like to see more of it, or ways that or spaces that I think need to be like further developed for myself to kind of emulate these qualities that I want. So thank you, everyone. This was really a conversation of like co-learning. And so I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Definitely. For like me too, like I've never heard the term regenerative space before this conversation. And I feel like once I heard it, I kind of like knew like what it could mean. And I like love that we were able to explore it too. And like one of the reflections or like takeaways that I hope to kind of like start implementing is like finding the ability to have a regenerative space like within myself, like not necessarily like out in like another space. Cause like Madison was talking about not being like dependent on like one space or another. I think it's like super important to also be able to like cultivate a sense of like healing that you're able to like fulfill for yourself, which I think isn't something that's like super talked a lot about. I feel like a lot of people can say like, oh, exercise and you'll feel better, like do this and you'll feel better, talk to someone and you'll feel better. But like finding that peace within yourself is something that is really important, and it's something that I want to explore a little bit more, just based on this entire conversation. So I loved everything that we've talked about, and like thank you all for like going on this journey with me of learning about regenerative spaces. I've really appreciated it.
Kind of to mimic what everyone else said, I really love this so much. I'd never heard of this concept before, but now I think I'm leaving with even more questions, which I love. Yeah, so thank you everyone for like your insight, for the ability to like learn with y'all, and yeah, it was super cool.
I also really like this, and I also learned for the first time about the term regenerative spaces. And this has been a very valuable trek, I think. And I like the point that Gary made about how sometimes regenerative spaces will serve the interest of capital rather than people. I think that's an important point to make.
I love having the discussion about regenerative spaces because I feel like it's one of the better discussions since it makes people realize like, hey, we're humans, we're not robots, we don't have like, oh, hustle days every single day, every minute is a work day. It's like acknowledging that, hey, we get tired, we're human, let's go get our batteries refilled.
Yeah, I thought this was one of the best treks for a lot of reasons. Just such a relevant concept that makes you think: am I in regenerative spaces? Am I creating them? Do I have them in my own brain? Is my family a regenerative? Is my family like system a regenerative space? And it's too simplistic to say, any one space is purely extractive or regenerative, but such a helpful mental model just to even be able to ask these questions.
Well, I have to say that I learned so much. I posed this question, I'm interested and I have some thoughts about it, but I have more questions than answers by far. And so this was really helpful to me. And I'll go back to something that Ashton said about the greatest retreat is within oneself. And I don't think we give that enough attention. And then the second, I guess the follow-up question to, where might we find regenerative spaces? And if the answer is partly within oneself, then what do we do after we have retreated? Like what's the retreat for? And so we come back into the world and we engage with the world. And so we have a new book, which I'll put in the chat. There's no profit motive here. You can download it for free, on measuring well-being. And I think it's in the introductory chapter that we wrote, we asked the question, maybe in the conclusion, we asked the question, what is well-being for? What is this inner retreat for? What is flourishing for? It's an end in itself, but it also is for something else. And what it might be for is creating more regenerative spaces in the world so others can flourish, so everyone can flourish without exception. So someone mentioned Maslow earlier, and Maslow, right before he died relatively young of a heart attack, he didn't get to complete his life's work, but he started talking about self-transcendence rather than self-actualization right at the end of his life. So self-actualization is for something, and the thing that it's for is to transcend the self in the responsible service of others. And so, he didn't talk about happiness. The goal of life is not happiness. And the cliche is that happiness is the byproduct of self-transcendence or serving others. And I think that's exactly where Maslow landed and would have further developed that had he lived longer. So I think that, regenerative space is also for something. It's for making more regenerative space.
I love that. Wow, so good. And so Matthew, since this was your first ever trek, I have to ask, what did you think about the trek overall?
This was a regenerative space. I think this is the right format for the deepest wisdom. It's not about a lecture. It's not about somebody presenting, provocative ideas for 30 minutes or something, and then questions and answers, which I'm increasingly finding very stifling. I think it's about learning from the collective wisdom of the group, and everyone has a specific contribution to share. Everyone has truth that they've learned from their own experience. And so I think this is exactly the right model.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. Thank you so much for coming. I know that you are so busy doing so much great work, but you're always welcome on another trek. We have these quite often. So just let us know when you have some time, and it would be great to have you back. And thank you all for coming as well. I know each of you are also very busy. And I hope that you all have a great rest of your night, and I will see you later. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Thank y'all. Bye.
The difference of time, that unites you across the globe, but we need this. We need to be able to explore and be in a space where you don't have to come with expert analysis in hand. And I hope that, I'm serious. I mean, there's people who supposedly think I know something about something like this. I mean, I wrote a part of a book about it one time. If you want to get the book, shameless plug. But no, seriously, I mean, to come and to be challenged, or to be invited and presented with something different, not necessarily, better or worse, but something different. And then as I shared with you in the group here, I mean, I did not expect this to be, and this is a compliment, I did not expect this to be as intellectually as intense as it was. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, I haven't thought this hard like all day, in terms of saying like, oh man, okay, I didn't think about it this way, or to hear it, particularly to hear it juxtaposed or compared with other places, other experiences. I think that's the tremendous gift and challenge, particularly of your generation, that I'm a part of in terms of living with in my own life with my own young people, young emerging young adults. But you're gonna live into this in a much different way than I am, and sometimes it's very easy, especially now. We have a number of things that are happening in the United States, like right now. I'm sure you have things happening in your respective spaces and places, but it gets real easy to get, kind of get focused in on what's happening just where you are, and not realizing that, in my language, inequity, challenge, um, all these things are not germane just to here, meaning in the US. And the fight for solidarity, or for equity, and the responsibility of being equitable, is a human enterprise, and of human, as well as create a consequence that impacts creation. And to know that you guys are a part of making it better, or working towards making it possible, is I can go to sleep tonight. I'll be all right. So thank you.
Well, I know I speak for all of us when I say just how much I appreciate the kind words, and loved having you, love the energy and the perspective that you brought. And we have these all the time. So if you want to come to more, like, you are more than welcome.
Yeah, I don't want to be like coming to all of them, because then that'd be kind of creepy, and
No.
it'll get old real fast. But I do want to kind of have like those Oprah moments where I come for like some special ones, and be like, maybe next time I'll bring you some gummy bears, and we need to do one where we're like actually eating, because like, you don't know this, but like, my thing is tiki masala and curry goat. And I had some Panera spinach yesterday. I literally just had, all that good stuff. And I still got some rice left over. My friend, I still got some rice. We got to do some noodles and stuff. So we got to do a culinary thing. We got to, bring some food and hook it up. Y'all got DoorDash in India? Oh, guess not. Okay. All right. Well, we'll work on that. We'll Uber you something.
No, we do. I was laughing because like I'm so hungry right now, and it's like 4 o'clock, and I haven't had my breakfast. I mean, it's not time for breakfast, but I mean, I haven't slept a wink, and then
I'm telling you,
exactly. Please stop talking about food.
Some naan, and you get you some pineapple or mango chutney. That's the breakfast of champions for me. That's all I got to say. That's all I got to say. Anyway.
Just putting it out there, FYI, naan is not very.
It's not. It's not. It's not
easy to make. It's not. You have to get like a lot of kneading, and it's like making pizza dough. You don't make pizza dough every day, do you?
I don't make pizza dough at all. That's why I told you DoorDash. I'm telling you, they just bring it to you in the US. It's like it just show up. It's like bam. It's like pizza. Where'd it come from? I called it. It came out the phone. So anyway, I enjoyed y'all. Gary's already like, I gotta go. We've been on here too long. But no, I love to find another way, another time to participate. And if I could be of any help and encouragement, let me know.
Yeah, just let us know. Gary, did you
want to Gary will track me down. He don't talk on the phone. He just texts you. I gotta get used to that. I be calling, he be like, no, I don't talk on the phone. No, the phone is not for talking. The phone is for texting. The phone is for Facebooking and Clubhouse and all that stuff. So you have to send me a carrier pigeon or something.
We have our own Clubhouse here. You're welcome anytime.
Cool. I will love it. I will love it. You guys be well.
right.
Madison, I have a topic suggestion.
Okay, what is it?
It's okay. 1 second. Freedom of press. Freedom of the press.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would
I
be
would
good.
so want to join that. Oh my god, I have so much to say.
Great.
Yeah, we can do that one next week.
All right,
Okay.
everyone. Thanks so much.
Talk soon. Be well.
Bye.
I'm not going to engage in a reflection about Dialogos because that's sort of my job and I'm doing it all the time. Instead, I'm going to reflect on what's happened here. I was really impressed and deeply encouraged. So that's what I'll say from my reflection.
Yeah, thank you, John. It was a very good conversation, and thank you to all of you. I really enjoyed this, and John, would love to have you on again in the future if you're up for it at some point. But yeah, thank you all for your time.
Of course, I'll come back if you want.
Yeah, great, and you can pick the topic as well.
Okay.
All right, and yeah, thank you all for your time, and I will see you later. Bye.
If possible, I just want to say one more thank you to John real quick. I've been listening to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, episode 50, outside on my lounge chair, and I popped up a notification that said like, oh yeah, John Vervaeke is streaming live Gen Z Changemakers. So when I clicked on that, I saw Madison and Shabu speaking, and that's what showed me what Civics Unplugged was.
Oh,
the way I learned about Civics Unplugged was through you. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're really welcome. Glad to hear that. Thanks, everyone. Take good care.
Thank you. Bye.